Hola, hola, buenas noches todos. Hi, Jennifer. Good evening.
Hi.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight in this second edition of Casa del Vecino, our neighbor's house. For those who don't know us, for the last 10 years, LIGA is a non-profit organization that has been promoting Latin American architecture. But now we're taking a side step and looking at our northern neighbors. This is the second episode of a series of 30-minute conversations on outstanding residential projects from the US. And before we start, we want to thank Panel Rey, our sponsor, for making this project happen. Special thanks to Ramiro Davila and Alberto Canto. Saludos as well to Adriana Maurer, who's leading LIGA in Mexico City, Daniela Treviño, our intern, and Arturo Arrieta, who's not only behind the controls, but also made all the beautiful graphic design for this event. So thank you so much, Arturo. Next Wednesday, we will talk with Moss Architects on their house number 10, sorry. But today is the turn of Jennifer Bonners, and we'll talk about Haus Gables in Atlanta. Thank you again, Jennifer, for accepting our invitation. I got to know, well, both you and your work in 2016 when I was teaching at GSD, and I saw an exhibition you created. It's actually a student exhibition with student work called Still Life. And for me, or at least the way I looked at it, was closely related to theatrical ideas which I was researching at that time for an exhibition at the Graham Foundation. The show had a front stage and a backstage and spotlights and all these theatrical things. And I was super excited the way it combined like two-dimensional elements with three-dimensional compositions, you know, like and sort of exhibition design, exhibition device, just like a classical still life painting, generated both a sort of three-dimensional composition, like of objects on a table, and two-dimensional composition of the images of things on a canvas. And I've been following your work ever since. I thought it was an absolutely wonderful exhibition. And now that we today are going to speak about your first realized architectural project, Haus Gables, I see, and that's probably my personal perspective as well, but I see a lot of this continuity and a lot of play in between like these two-dimensional and three-dimensional elements. For me, when I see the roof of the Haus Gables, which is like sort of child's profile of a gabled house, in your house it becomes like hyper-dimensional, you know, like more than three-dimensional, while other elements like the brick wall, all of a sudden they become like almost flat design. So it's wonderful to see that continuity, and trying to do this a little bit scripted, this conversation, so you can answer my questions with graphic images. I would like to start to think about the problem of the generic suburban plot. Now, how you deal with that if you have to work on such a site, and how do you really get, where does the project takes its clues from?
Yeah, if we could have the first slide. I mean, obviously the project's called Haus Gables, so it's all about the roof. But I was just looking at your intro with all the architects you've asked to present houses this month, and they're all gables except for Mark and Sharon's vault house. So I was just looking at all the like gable shapes, but yeah, so I'm very interested in looking specifically at the roof, which is found in the suburbs, but also in urban neighborhoods. But it's the roof that kind of belongs to the contractor canon, not really, it's kind of non-architectural in a way. And although some would call these like banal forms, I see them as possible combinations and exciting things that we can do with the architectural plan. So next. So we were documenting 50 houses cut across multiple neighborhoods in the city of Atlanta. And the roof combinations are kind of endless, right? So there's gables, hip roofs, dormers, shed roofs. And so they're kind of a mashup, and like one house might require like 9 roofs being mashed up. Next. And so these are the everyday roof slopes or pitches that are used in these everyday roofs, and they're usually under 12 over 12, so 45 degree. And in Haus Gables, I'm interested in kind of working with steeper pitches, and so I'm using 17 over 12 and 19 over 12. Next. So the other kind of banal thing that I'm trying to flip is I think we should start building non-vented roofs. So one, the diagram on the right, where we can start to see the underneath side of the roof on the interior. And just to be clear, the majority of the houses that get built in the US are vented roofs. And so you normally just get this flat ceiling. And I'm going to talk about that later. Next. So Haus Gables originally started out as this body of research and also as a representational project. So we made 16 massing models. So massing models that aren't on your desk, but like kind of enlarged and overscaled. And we photographed them like back in the front yard of the original houses that we had sampled the banal roofs from. Next. And so this is the installation of the collection of overscaled massing models. Next. Yeah.
Yeah. So that house, I mean, the way the roof works, that I mean, you wrote about it. It's a different way of working, no? Like all of a sudden you're compared to sort of canonical architectural canons, you know, like of the free plan and the round plan, and then you say I do a roof plan. Can you explain it a bit further?
Sure. So this next image is Haus Gables. You know, it's sitting in this dense in-town neighborhood that adjoins Atlanta's Beltline. The Beltline is this pedestrian loop that cuts through 45 neighborhoods within the city, and it's a pedestrian ring. So this house kind of adjoins that. And in this photograph by the architectural photographer Tim Hersley, we see my ambition kind of playing out quite literally, right? So I really wanted to just build one of these massing models one-to-one. And I'll talk about it in greater detail later, but the house is not built out of foam, obviously. It's built out of cross-laminated timber panels. So next. So this is the tight urban plot that we have. It's 24 feet wide. With setbacks, I could only build 18 feet, the width of the house. Next. And so although this is a roof project, it's important how the house meets the ground. And so you kind of slope down this driveway into the garage. This is the primary elevation, like the street facing elevation. And something starts, you know, you can see from this outer image that something's a little off, right? That the gable's not perfect and it's kind of clipped off on the front.
No?
What?
Floats like a real, yeah, it looks very airy, like a model almost again.
Yeah, and there's no front door, right? Because it looks more like a model. And so the door is actually inset down in the basement. Next. And I wanted to show the outside first to then set up what you're asking, Wonne, which is like, you know, oftentimes we turn to two dominant organizational systems, right, of the past century. And so we automatically turn to the free plan, or sometimes people are working on the ROM plan, or a combination of the two. And so just as you've said, like, I'm really interested in what about using the roof plan as a way of organizing the domestic interior. Next. So you see here on the first level, you kind of enter the house in this kind of free plan stair. So I would say that's like a Corbusian stair. That's not, starts in the basement, which is a concrete box, right? So once you arrive at the top of this landing of the stair, you're in the CLT house, cross-laminated timber house. And so in my mind, that curved stair belongs to the first floor. So on this level is the kitchen, a bedroom, a bathroom, and a dining room. And you can't really tell from this image exactly if it has anything to do with the roof plan at all, but there are two double height spaces. If we go to the next slide. On the second floor plan, we've drawn the ridges of the roof plan above onto the plan. And so here you can see that rooms, like corners of rooms, start to align with the ridge line of a gable above. Or you see that long ridge line in the center of the plan diagonally. That's kind of setting up the organization for the catwalk. Next. But I think this section is really the best orthographic drawing to be able to read the roof plan, right? Because here you can see like roof rooms that are made, and that's when there's roofs that are nested inside larger roofs and they create enclosed spaces or rooms. You also can see some double height spaces here. And keep in mind that the house is only 18 feet wide, and for Americans, that's a pretty narrow plan. So I think the promise of the roof plan I'm offering to everyone is that maybe you can have more volumetric space in tight urban lots. Next. This is one of my favorite views of the house, and this is exactly what I was just describing, this bedroom that's being hung from the larger roof above. And you get this kind of perfect gable view here. And so what the cross-laminated timber panels are doing as a structural, like superstructure, they're kind of acting as a folded plate. And so literally we can hang the room on the underneath side. This also starts to suggest an idea about faux finishes, which I think we're going to talk about a little later. Next slide. And this is that interior of the one bedroom that's kind of fully enclosed. Nowhere is there like a perfect gable. It's always a mashup of multiple gables. So in this room, I believe there's 2 intersecting gables. Next. Also, like another point about the roof plan would be that, you know, in this space, which is the catwalk on the 2nd floor, adjacent to this catwalk, we get a bunch of different kinds of spaces, right? So this looks kind of like an obstructed view. There's like a part of a gable that's kind of compressing the space. And if we go to the next slide, which is the other side of this cross-laminated timber wall, we get the open patio area. And here we get kind of a subtractive gable that's more, has a reading like a stereotomic object, right? So with planes of CLT, we're actually producing a stereotomic reading on the exterior of the house. Next. And then on the other side of the catwalk, if we, you know, peer over and look into the dining room area, again, we get a third kind of space. So within the roof plan logic, you can kind of produce multiple readings of the gable.
That's interesting how the way a roof in the end becomes sort of the structural or the programmatic almost organizer of the space as well, which is funny because if you do a normal, let's say an attic remodel, basically the same thing would happen. One way or another, have to deal with that pre-existing fact.
You have to subdivide it, yeah.
Exactly. And I mean, like many of the houses we're actually showing in this series, they try to play a sort of and I talked about it last week with Alison and Lapsy, like this tricky balancing act between like the conventional and the unconventional. In your case, I would even say between the banal and the super eccentric. You know, like can you explain a little bit how this tension is important for you between these two extremes?
Sure. Yeah, obviously, if we could move to the next slide, if we think about the banal and the convention that I'm starting with the roof, I'm obviously interested in the image of the house, right? If I'm starting with gables, I'm interested in that conversation with the public or the neighbors or non-architects. But clearly, even though I'm starting with the roof, I'm also denying some of the parts of the roof that usually come along with it, right? So like eaves or gutters or, you know, these things that make it look like a house. So in this image, you could see, because I'm referring back to the massing model, the house has been sheared and clipped off, right? And so you get these like non-conventional graphic lines at the edge of the house. And you can't read the gable as you would in a conventional or kind of normative scenario. So yeah, while it's a normal house with 6 gables. It's also, like you said, it's trying to be eccentric or weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me a lot often when we as architects make models, when the model is finished, we kind of want it to be the way as it is. And then always I can see a lot of resistance towards all the next steps. And that's why you're hiding these gutters and all the additional decoration that makes it, sometimes just more conventional and more banal.
Yeah, but I'm not a Swiss architect, right? So I think the detailing is not of like the Swiss. I mean, I think it's, I'll talk about with the faux finishing, but maybe there's like an American Southern architecture happening here. If you go to the next slide, I think this is an image also by the photographer Tim Hersley, where he lit the house very dramatically on the exterior, and that's because in the facade is a stucco render, but I'm trying to make the stucco look like bricks, and you can't see it in this image, but he's put several lights, photographed the house, and to me, it starts to feel like a kind of a Southern Gothic portrait of house, right? So it's like irrational, it's kind of grotesque, you know, it's dark or moody. Next. And then the other way I'd say I'm kind of pushing back against the conventional, I want to bring us back down to the garage space. So while it's a garage and it's sunken, I'm trying to flip that by turning all the materials like high glossy white. So the walls are aluminum, high glossy painted, the ceiling, the floor. And here I'm working with the photographer Naro from London, and Marcelo put these kind of buckets in the scene to match my dress. And it was kind of like looking at it later, it was like, is this an omen that the roof is gonna leak?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you the same thing. It really it kind of looks like the stories you heard about the leaking Farnsworth house and stuff, you know, this reason.
Well, yeah, so Marcella and I never talked about it, and I'm like, well, the house did leak, like the roof did leak in the beginning. So this is a very eerie image for me.
Like all houses do in the beginning, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And of course, I was looking at it; it cannot be leaking because this is the garage space. This is like three floors below the roof, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, and then I want to take us back out to the exterior of the house. Next slide. Where there was an ambition to use stucco, cementitious stucco for the facades. But I wanted to make a graphic, right? Like you talked about, wanted to make a graphic and a flatness, and not to just put expansion joints, you know, into the facade. And so I was really interested in like how to make stucco look like bricks. And specifically, I was interested in glitter or something sparkly. And you can't really see it in this photograph, but I'll try to show you in a minute, where we were looking at the, we put like thousands of glass beads thrown as kind of the last step into the stucco. And so when a light hits it, it kind of shimmers much like road reflectors do on the road striping of the roadways. So next slide. So this was exhibited in a gallery in Boston. These were our kind of supplies, like this like stamp, and then, you know, a handful of glass beads there. We also looked at making like a wood grain pattern. So when I tried to start building this on site, next slide, I called around to subcontractors in Atlanta, and I was like, you know, I've got this process. I want you to try to make the facade look like bricks with stucco. And he's like, oh yeah, we've already done that around the corner on an Arby's fast food restaurant. And I was like, you know, okay, there goes thinking that I was doing like some kind of invention here. But you know, what I always say is like what Arby's doesn't have that Haus Gables has is kind of the glitter. So if we go to the next slide, you know, when light hits it or when a flash hits it, you get this kind of glowing graphic, and then the brick actually pops out versus the graphic of the mortar joints. Next.
So all the walls are made out of this brick pattern?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's actually just a product, right, that the subcontractor uses, which is a sticker. So they do their first 2 layers of the stucco, and then they put the sticker on and add 1 more layer and then peel the sticker off. And so you're getting that like 1/8 inch reveal.
It's amazing. You don't see it in the faraway pictures, no? It just camera it disappears. Very beautiful.
Next slide.
Yes, and that's interesting that we see now the typical US balloon frame, because that's of course the first logical decision to build a house like that. But you decided to work with cross-laminated timber for this project, and I love it because it becomes again it's so like it has such a model quality. It's like you're cutting little pieces of balsa wood and just gluing them together. I mean, that's the way the house sometimes looks in its simplicity, you know, like can you tell me a little bit why you chose not to work with the normal balloon frame sticks?
Yeah, so obviously the image on the left shows us this is how we build the kind of contractor mashup of roofs, right? This is how America is built, with 2x6s and 2x8s and whatever. So it's possible, but the thing is I wanted to remove the kind of horizontal member, right? So to do that, you have a problem. And so to remove that ceiling plane and that cross horizontal member, I was working with the structural engineer Hanif Kara in London, a mentor and colleague of mine at the GSD, and he was like, Jennifer, I think you're gonna have to go to steel or cross-laminated timber. I was like, what? I can't, I'm working on the ordinary, you know, in the South, I can't switch to some, you know, innovative wood material. But what I started to think about is that the cross-laminated timber is the 2x6s now just turned on them sides and then glued together in alternating layers. So instead of building with sticks, we're now building with surfaces. So next slide. And so the 2x6 is in there still, but it's like, you know, part of an engineered panel. And so we worked actually with 4 engineers, one out of New Hampshire called Benson Wood, a guy that had worked on like PhD with mass timber called Fire Tower, who was running the calculations, and then an engineer in Atlanta that connected the kind of concrete box to the CLT box. Next slide. So I think we're going to run a video now, and this is kind of showing you the house under construction.
Tura, can you run a video?
And then there's 87 panels in total. They're coming from the manufacturer in Austria, KLH, and they were shipped over to the port of Savannah and then trucked over on 11 trucks to the site. And so we're using 3 different kinds of panels. You know, the longest one is like 30 feet long. You can see Terry installing it there in the video. We're using 3-ply panels for the walls, exterior and interior. We're using 7-ply for the floor there and 5-ply for the roof.
Yeah, it's incredible how much it looks like a model building.
Yes.
Like you just
like chipboard, right? Or like
want to glue it all together simply. It's very beautiful the way you then actually also did the handrails for the staircases out of the same material. Or did I see that? Did I see that right?
Yeah. So the guardrails and handrail, you know, are large CLT pieces. And there's a lot of obviously miter cuts, which is all happening like flip milled in Austria, you know. And so this house went together in like 14 days with someone operating the crane and 3 others. Yeah, and you kind of see the skyline of Atlanta there and some of John Portman's towers in the background.
It's actually a little bit, I mean, of course, it's absolutely the opposite as concrete as a material, but it is the same in the same way that the way we use concrete a lot in Mexico, it's a structural material that also all of us immediately is like the interior finish and the structural element and the thing that gives quality and texture to the space.
Yeah. I mean, it's very similar to like flying precast concrete panels into place, right? That's how fast, except obviously it's more sustainable and it's much, much lighter and like, you know, but same, yeah, flat and flat packed.
And that's an image then of the building without any finishes.
Yeah, I think we could just flip through these. This is the kind of raw state of the CLT. I worked with a local photographer there that had like kind of one afternoon to photograph the house. Next slide. In its raw state before the contractor had to get the windows in and start weatherproofing it.
It's beautiful like that as well. I mean, it's the same thing even with the balloon frame. It's also very powerful always when it's in its raw construction phase before all the paper and synthetics and plastic building materials go in. And that brings on, I already saw the next image to the idea of these faux finishes, no? All these false materialities that you played with, which I think is really interesting, also related again to this idea of theatrality and kind of representation of materials as something else than what they appear to be. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think I mentioned to you before, like, maybe this project has too many ideas, but for me, it can't just be CLT. It just can't be this like Scandinavian wooden interior. This is the house in Atlanta. And so the faux finishing idea kind of begins with this image for me, which is the Southern Institute of Faux Finishing. It's located in Brandon, Mississippi, and I'm not really sure what happens there, but it seems to be connected with a long-standing tradition in the South to make things look like other materials, like by painting.
Plastic surgery joint, actually.
So we see the porcelain bathtub on the right, but there's an ambition here to have a marble bathtub, right? And so faux finishing is very aspirational and optimistic. Next slide. And so as an architect, I'm not painting the finishes as they did in the past, but I'm specifying fake materials. Next slide. So materials that are vinyl, but that look like wood or that look like marble. I'm specifying terrazzo tile, not terrazzo that's like poured in place and real. Next slide. Or ceramic tiles that look like marble veining and a kind of cartoonish graphic. So this is one of the view where we start to see the faux finishes become kind of like wainscoting. So both the floor material and wainscoting up the walls. Next slide. And these are the faux finish plans. And so floor 1 is on top, floor 2 is on bottom. Next slide. And so it's a pretty eclectic mix, but the ambition here is that we're standing in the bedroom now and we're looking through what looks like a concrete material that's actually vinyl. We're looking through to the dining room, which is a kind of a canary yellow vinyl that kind of has this marbling effect, all the way back to the kitchen, which is black terrazzo. So you're getting like a 55-foot long view, and you're kind of getting this color blocking scenario of these 3 materials. So it's very graphic and flattening. Next. So I'm interested in like the corner or the seams where like these 3 materials might meet at an intersection in the house. Next. In the bathroom, obviously, this is a ceramic tile that looks like marble veining that's kind of been cartoonish, it's kind of a cartoonish graphic. Next. And the black terrazzo kitchen that I was talking about. So each of these materials, they're not kind of behaving to the room, right? So there's, in some cases, it might be 12 inches on the off the floor on one side of the room and then come up to be the backsplash for the kitchen on the other side of the room. So you kind of get these wedges of space. So like yet another geometry that's being kind of mapped onto these rooms.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. So,
Jennifer, how does, I mean, and you talked a little bit, you talked about it in the beginning, but to round off, I would like to circle back on that first idea of how this house now, because this is your first built project as an architect. I wonder how it relates to other work you've done, both work in exhibitions and academical and research work with your studio with Mal.
Yeah, so if we pull up a slide, I mean, there's a lot of stuff I didn't even talk about. Next slide. Which is like the dollhouse that I made for this project. Yeah, you're right. This is the first built project that I've had. And so it's kind of frustrating that it took 8 years to like build something. But I was kind of reflecting, you know, maybe this is our process is this long, slow process. And this is practice for me, or whatever capacity that is. And so this dollhouse model is a 1 to 12 scale model. And I think it kind of underscores this idea about the representational project being central to the architecture. So I'm making this model at the same time as the faux finishes. And we're projecting these colored gel lighting effects that you mentioned in the still life exhibition, like onto this kind of large scale model. So next slide. And so this is while I'm trying to work out all those materials and the kind of glow and the possibilities on the interior. Next.
Yeah, I think these images are absolutely stunning. I mean, it's like next week we'll talk to Michael Meredith and Hilary Sample that also are super specific in their model photography. I see it in yours as well. It creates a whole fantastical world of depth and layering.
Yeah, I wanted to end by this last image. Next slide. Which is like how the house is being used. So although I'm projecting color lights onto my models in my studio, what's been interesting to watch is how the creative class in Atlanta is using the house to shoot artwork for their albums or make rap videos inside. And they're, you know, using the faux finishes as a backdrop. And I think it's really interesting that the overlaps of glowing lights, as we can see here in this artist's work, her name's Yuli, where they're actually shooting, you know, putting like these glowing lights like onto the house as part of the backdrop. So yeah, I just say that I'm interested in both the representational project, the way the architect kind of works on collectives. Like I work on an idea for 5 years, right? So if you think about domestic hats, which are these serial models, and this research all the way to, you know, material testing and the completion of Haus Gables, that's a 5-year process. And so I would say, like thinking about the larger ambition at Mall, we're always working on like collectives. And so the next project is something called Best Sandwiches. And I'm hoping to build soon-ish an office tower out of that kind of collective work. So
yeah, I also hope to build soonish an office tower. It's not really happening, but
yeah, soonish.
No, it's really nice to see how all these things interrelate in your work, and as we're trying to keep this within a sort of 30-minute time frame, I want to thank you so much. I thought it was, I think it was a really powerful house to look at. It's interesting how you said that you said that maybe I put too many ideas in it. It still feels very calm and unsaturated, both from the interior view and the exterior views. Which I think is really, really nice to see. Yeah, to see the project stand there very, let's say self-conscious, you know, like very relaxed without too much pose. So, if I understand well, I can rent a house to shoot rap videos there in Atlanta now.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it and excited to, share this with your students and professionals in Mexico City.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I will be speaking soon, and till later. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.